we talk about this fourth trimester, those 3 months postpartum, but really for most women, their healing journey will take longer than that. So it's important to understand, yes, those 3 months postpartum are very important, but so are the months that follow that as well. So your nutrient needs are going to change by trimester. And during the postpartum phase, your nutrient needs are going to increase even more than during your pregnancy phases. So during, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, postpartum is going to increase even more, especially if you are breastfeeding. Welcome to the Mind and My Wellness podcast, your podcast for all things macros, movement, mindset, and everything in between. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Mind and My Wellness podcast. This is your host, Danny. And today's episode, we are diving into pregnancy and postpartum talk around nutrition because this is a big topic. I've worked with hundreds of women throughout my coaching programs who are either pregnant or hoping to become pregnant or in their postpartum journey. So I'm going to cover a couple of the most commonly asked questions I get to help anybody in this phase of life. And also, this is just a super relative topic for myself because I am now entering my third trimester as I'm recording this, which is absolutely crazy. I still remember first trimester feeling like, oh my gosh, this is going to be such a long journey ahead because of all the nerves and everything with first trimester. Second trimester has flown by. And now here we are entering third trimester with just a couple months left. And I am so excited, but I still feel like there's so much to do. And for anybody who's gone through pregnancy before, I'm sure your advice is like, there's only so much you can plan. There's so much that you cannot plan for. And that's the advice I keep getting. So doing my best to plan what I can, but also being completely open to things going off plan, having a birth plan, knowing that that birth plan is really not a plan. It's more of just a wish list. And so to give you an update quickly just on my pregnancy so far, I feel like we haven't really caught up since my last pregnancy update, which was the announcement, which was right after first trimester, partly into second trimester. Thankfully, my pregnancy has been relatively smooth. First trimester, of course, I had those first trimester morning sickness, which for me wasn't really morning sickness. I actually felt pretty good in the morning. It was later in the day. Since then, I have been prioritizing strength training 4 days a week. That is what feels good for me and my body. With strength training, what that's looked like is I'm still doing my area specific strength workouts with some modifications here and there. And to my surprise, I've really been able to maintain my weight over time. With certain things, I kind of assess day by day on my energy levels and on comfort to see, okay, do I need to pull back? Do I need to modify this? Do I need to change? Maybe I'm not using the bar. Maybe I'm using a resistance band instead. So I'm starting to make those modifications whenever I feel like I need to. But for the most part, I have been feeling so good keeping up with 4 days a week of strength training. And I truly give all of the credit to that, as well as prioritizing certain nutritional needs throughout pregnancy that have really helped prevent any sort of body aches or pains or things popping up in my body. It really hasn't been outside of sleep, which I am struggling with insomnia throughout this pregnancy, which has been something that I was not expecting from the first trimester up till today. I know first trimester, it can kind of pop up. And then again in third trimester, just because of discomfort. I mean, all throughout second trimester, I had struggled with insomnia. And I equate that to, yes, having to get up and go to the bathroom. But there were so many moving pieces in my life during this second trimester that I know were causing a lot of stress and a lot of overthinking. And so no matter what I did, I tried to implement as many tactics in terms of, nervous system regulation, reading before bed, not watching TV, having a proper nighttime routine, trying not to drink too much water before bed. But this was one I struggled with because I was just constantly wanting to drink water. All of these things still I was struggling struggling with that insomnia. So if you are finding yourself in a similar boat, know that you're not alone. But overall, my energy levels have still been feeling so great. So I really can't complain too much. I am starting to experience, a little bit of fatigue here and there now that we're entering that third trimester. Overall, I really can't complain too much. So a couple things, like I said, I've been keeping up with my 4 days a week of strength training, area specific strength training. That is what feels good for me. And it has really helped, I think, in terms of just how my body's feeling throughout this pregnancy so far. And then I've also incorporated pelvic floor and deep core physical therapy. So I'm going throughout second trimester, either every 2 to 3 or 4 weeks, depending on my availability, really. But this has really been helping too. We're really focusing on strengthening right now. Before now, as we enter this third trimester, we're going to be focusing more on relaxing. And I think this has really helped as well too. It's really helped to connect this mind to body connection, where I have a full episode with 2 amazing women that I recorded, and it's live. It's a couple episodes back on pelvic floor and postpartum recovery. Within that, it's truly amazing. I mean, I didn't know a lot about really relaxing the pelvic floor, what the pelvic floor even was, and understanding that and really being able to tap into that in my body has helped tremendously. And I really hope that that helps with my delivery and recovery as well. So that's something that's been added into my routine. But I've also been keeping up with things like my acupuncture, which has really been helping from a stress management perspective. Next week's episode, I am diving into a little more of a personal update, just in terms of a lot of the stresses that I've been under over the past couple months and how that's kind of influenced my nutrition in a negative way, and how I have really worked to turn that around. What are those easy action items that I can take to prioritize those in stressful times? But with all this stress, with all this uncertainty, with all these changes coming about, acupuncture has been my constant. And I really, really, really love going to my acupuncture appointments. Those are a couple things that I've really been prioritizing throughout my pregnancy that I truly believe have helped. So overall, feeling good. We are working into that third trimester. I am not sure, and I know people are going to laugh. I literally am like, how am I going to get bigger than this? But there's still so much more to grow. So I can't wait for the rest of this journey. And I love bringing you guys along with me and just all of the support that you guys have given me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It truly has been such an amazing journey. And I have found this new love for my body that I've never experienced before. And I just feel so connected with my body, unlike anything I've ever felt before. And it has truly been a life-changing experience. And I know that that's just going to continue throughout this third trimester, throughout postpartum and recovery from there. So I can't wait to take you guys along on the journey. All right, that was a really long update from me, but today we're going to talk about pregnancy and postpartum nutrition in particular, and some of the questions I get around nutrition during these trimesters, inclusive of that fourth trimester postpartum, from the soon-to-be moms and new moms that I have worked with over time. So a couple of the questions that we'll dive into, they are going to really be there to help you to kind of provide a North Star, to provide a guide. Everybody, I want to preface by saying every single person and their pregnancy and their postpartum journey and their delivery, they are going to be unique, just like every single person outside of pregnancy, outside of recovery. Postpartum is bio-individual. So take this information knowing that it is going to shift person to person, but these general guidelines are really going to be there to help you in terms of understanding the priorities throughout pregnancy and postpartum for not only you, but for baby as well. First, do you have to track macros while you're pregnant, while you're postpartum, or is it okay to not track? Just like any time in life, you do not need to track macros. You do not need to track macros when you're pregnant. You do not need to track macros when you're postpartum. You do not need to track macros anytime in your life. These are simply a tool that you can use to help inform how you're eating and making decisions based on the understanding of the macronutrients that you're consuming to make those better decisions for you based off whatever your goal is. Maybe your goal is to reduce body fat. Maybe your goal is to focus on body recomposition, where you're building some muscle and maybe chipping away at a little bit of body fat. Maybe your goal is to just feel good, stop dieting, increase your energy levels, have more mental clarity. Macros can do that too. So it is simply a tool and a knowledge base to have to implement whenever you need it. And you don't need to track to implement macros. And I talk about this in a very, very, very early episode. I want to say it's like episode 2 or 3, where I talk about how I have not tracked macros for a very long time and what I do instead. But I'm using that basis of macros. So like I said, I'm entering my 3rd trimester right now as I'm recording this, and I have not been tracking macros as a consistent part of my day, week, even year for over a year now. So even before I got pregnant, I would check in here and there, maybe on certain days to make sure I'm getting enough protein, enough calories. And if you guys recall, or if you have heard me share this before, in order for me to get pregnant, because I struggled with hypothalamic amenorrhea, I had to put on additional weight. So I was actually eating in a bit of a surplus before I even got pregnant. And I gained about 8 pounds. And then I was able to naturally get pregnant very quickly, actually. So with that in mind, as I'm speaking now, entering this 3rd trimester, I have not been actively tracking. However, some days I will track very loosely, and some days I'll use my food scale, and a lot of days I won't, and it'll be more of a guesstimate. But this is mainly to ensure that I am A, consuming enough calories for the trimester that I'm in, and B, I'm consuming enough protein, which is so critical and essential throughout pregnancy and postpartum, and really any chapter of your life. So making sure that I am incorporating the caloric needs that my body has in particular, as well as the protein needs that my body has. So occasionally I will check in here and there. When do I do it? It's very sporadic. It's whenever I feel like maybe I have not been super consistent with my protein intake, or maybe I'm feeling like, oh, I feel like I just, especially with some of the stressors in my life recently, maybe I'm not eating enough calories. Let me just loosely track today to see where my caloric intake is roughly falling, to make sure like, okay, I'm supporting myself, I'm supporting baby, we're good. Or like, hey, I'm falling a little short here, maybe in fats, maybe in carbs, maybe it's in protein. And I can really make that a focus over the next few days, weeks, whatever that looks like. So no, you don't need to track. It can be an amazing tool. You don't have to use it religiously. You can do it here and there as needed. It is a tool that is there to help you. It is not something that you should be obsessing over, though. So make sure that you are using it, if you are using tracking, in a way that's going to be really supportive for you and not feeling overwhelming or overbearing during this phase, but really any phase at all. I'm doing this to really ensure that I'm building balanced meals, is to focus on building my meals with proteins, fats, and fibers in particular. And fiber is a form of carbohydrates, but there are different forms of carbohydrates. So there's fiber sources, there are sugar sources, and starch sources of fiber. So I'm really trying to prioritize fiber carbohydrate sources over those sugars and those starches. But as we know, throughout pregnancy, we're getting cravings. So I'm trying to balance all of that. So really making sure if I am tracking, I am making sure that I'm prioritizing the focal points of my meals and day around proteins, fats, and fiber. Now, this is also really going to help with regulating overall blood sugar levels, but it's also going to help the nutrient needs that you and baby both have during this time. And you're primarily going to find those nutrients in those 3 categories, either protein, fats, or fiber. I know it's extremely tempting, like I said, to really want to reach for those refined carbohydrates like the sugars and the starches, the more processed foods during this time. Trust me, I get it. I had Eric one day. I was like, I have not had a Krispy Kreme donut. I mean, I don't know, in over a decade. I've never even thought about it. But there was one day where I was like, oh my gosh, I need a Krispy Kreme donut. Love that man. He drove out and he got me a Krispy Kreme donut and I ate it. And I was like, that was everything I needed. But understanding how to balance that and understanding that you're not going to get the nutrient needs the essential nutrient needs that both you and baby need, whether that's in pregnancy or the postpartum period. So, those refined carbohydrates, which include sugars and starches, lack in those essential nutrients that are needed for the development of baby throughout pregnancy and the nutrients you need for the recovery process postpartum. But also, baby needs it postpartum too, especially, I mean, if you're breastfeeding, you need to make sure that the nutrients you're consuming, those are being passed on to baby as well. So we want to make sure that we are prioritizing specific macronutrients because those micronutrients, those essential vitamins, minerals that our bodies need for ourselves and for baby are going to fall under those specific foods with those macronutrients. So making sure that, you are really prioritizing your nutrition during this time, which leads me into this idea that I've really been rolling around with. And it's this, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this. If you're like me, you're getting targeted with every single pregnancy post on Instagram, on social media, and it really glamorizes this time in your life where you're like, whatever, I'm pregnant. I'm not going to care as much about my nutrition. I'm going to be super lenient. It's fine. I'm gaining weight anyway. I'm going to lean into like my McDonald's and da 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 da, whatever that food is that keeps popping up on my Instagram. But I really think that our society leans in and almost glamorizes quote unquote like eating junk and eating for two, when the truth is that this time in your life is really when we should be prioritizing our nutrition, because we need to consider more than just ourselves and our own health. We also have to consider our baby's health. But again, don't get me wrong. This does not mean that you have to like cut out all of the quote unquote junk that you are maybe craving. Like I said, your girl wanted a Krispy Kreme donut. Her husband went out and got her a Krispy Kreme donut and she was beyond happy. But I know how to balance it in a way that is still going to support my body and my baby's development, whether that's throughout pregnancy or through postpartum. So, understanding that there is a balance, that this isn't a period of time where it's just oh, I'm going to throw out the window during this time. It's really important that we still are prioritizing, but finding that balance. Okay, now let's jump into some of the commonly asked questions and scenarios that I get asked from my pregnant and postpartum mamas. So, whether you're tracking or you're not, there are some general guidelines that should be considered when you're pregnant and going through that postpartum phase. Number one is your nutrient needs are going to differ throughout each trimester, and definitely during that fourth trimester, during postpartum and beyond. So we talk about this fourth trimester, those 3 months postpartum, but really for most women, their healing journey will take longer than that. So it's important to understand, yes, those 3 months postpartum are very important, but so are the months that follow that as well. So your nutrient needs are going to change by trimester. And during the postpartum phase, your nutrient needs are going to increase even more than during your pregnancy phases. So during, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, postpartum is going to increase even more, especially if you are breastfeeding. Number two, during the postpartum phase, if you are breastfeeding, it's extremely important that you are consuming the appropriate amount of calories for you, but also supporting your baby's growth with the nutrients needed. So, like I was talking about, it's important that we are getting those essential nutrients, those vitamins and minerals that come in the form of those micronutrients through those foods, those macros like your proteins, your fats, and then carbohydrates in the form of that fiber. So, really making sure that we are prioritizing that, because you're going to be transferring those nutrients to baby through your breast milk. So, it's important that we are supporting our body by fueling it enough with enough calories, but with the right nutrients needed to not only help you, but help baby through that breast milk. But if you're not breastfeeding, it is still important that you are incorporating certain nutrients for your own recovery. Your body just went through a very traumatic experience, and it took 9, 10 months to build this baby, to build and create this new life. and it needs plenty of time and fuel to recover from it as well. So there are specific micronutrients which fall again under those primary macronutrients that are going to do things like supporting overall tissue repair, cell reproduction, and more collagen reproduction and more during this extremely critical time of recovery. So, whether or not you're breastfeeding, it is important that micronutrients and macronutrients are taken into account. But again, that doesn't mean you need to track, especially postpartum. There's so much going on, especially if you're a new mom and you're going through it for the first time, you're learning everything from the ground up. Don't overwhelm yourself, but understanding the primary principles and foundations to support the nutrient needs that your body has and your baby has is going to be so beneficial and helpful in the long run. Now, moving on to question number 4 that I get asked very, very often is around weight loss postpartum and how can, if I am breastfeeding in particular, if I'm breastfeeding and I want to lose some of the pregnancy weight, but in a very sustainable way, how can I do that without affecting my milk supply? Is it even possible? And if so, how do I even go about it? And the good news is that it is very, very possible. You can absolutely lose overall pregnancy weight. And a lot of that weight is going to just happen naturally throughout your recovery process for many different reasons. But oftentimes what I'll see is, you lose most of the weight and then there's maybe 5, 10, 15 pounds that you're really just struggling losing. My first note that I want to make here is that although you want to lose the weight, that should not be your first goal after having baby, in my opinion. Recovery should always be that first goal and always, always come first and foremost, because the way in which you recover is going to set the stage for how your body responds from here on out. So if you try to just jump right into a calorie deficit or entering a fat loss phase, even if you are breastfeeding, that can do more harm than good in the long run if you aren't prioritizing your overall recovery. So we want to make sure that there's a lot going on with our hormones during this time. And we want to make sure that we are prioritizing that and our overall body's recovery during this crucial period of postpartum to set ourselves up for future weight loss success if that is your goal. So let's say that the time is right and you are ready to kind of chip away at any additional body weight that is kind of sticking around. Making sure first, this is my first recommendation, is to make sure that you're eating at maintenance first and including those calories that you need and those macros needed for breastfeeding is a really great place to start to set a baseline and assess your overall recovery, your milk supply, and your overall energy levels before even entering a deficit. So, what I mean by this is you have your maintenance calories plus the additional calories that your body needs for milk supply if you're breastfeeding. Staying there and assessing, getting, maybe a little bit more consistent with it there. Maybe you start tracking, maybe you don't start tracking, but you're just more mindful around the food choices that you're making at this point. But staying at maintenance, increasing your calories based off your breastfeeding needs, setting that baseline to see, okay, how am I recovering? How is my milk supply? If my milk supply seems a little bit low, increase those calories a little bit. If you're feeling like your milk supply is good, you're assessing your recovery and your overall energy levels. Granted, I know this time energy levels are like, WTF, what is energy? But if your overall energy levels, you're feeling pretty good and it's not something that you're like, I cannot make it through the day, then this is a really great baseline to have. And so then after that, when your body is ready to enter into a slight deficit while still promoting milk supply, so if you're still breastfeeding, but the time has come when you're like, yes, okay, I feel like I'm ready to enter a deficit. To do this, you'll need to take into account the amount of calories and macros that you need to maintain milk supply while also calculating a very slight deficit. So I like to start in a very slight deficit first before chipping away at increasing your deficit any, because milk supply is always going to be number one priority here. So instead of, cutting calories, slashing calories, reducing overall carbohydrates, which carbohydrates are important during this time. Not to get too in the weeds, it changes because during pregnancy, I would say carbohydrates are actually on the lower end of the priority list, whereas if you are breastfeeding postpartum, those end up being a very, very high need in terms of macronutrients. And I'll talk more on this in just a second. But if you are noticing that you enter a deficit and you went too deep into a deficit too soon, your milk supply is going to get affected, most likely. And so this is why I like to start small and then build so that you have control and you can gauge overall milk supply, because again, that is first and foremost the priority here. Now, before we kind of wrap this up, I do want to say I do not even recommend entering a calorie deficit until you are at least 4 to 6 months postpartum. And again, this is going to depend person to person. It's going to depend on your recovery experience. And it's important to never rush that journey. Remember, it's taken 9, 10 months for your body to create this life. It's okay if it takes a little bit of time for you to feel like you are seeing progress in terms of that weight loss. And number one priority should always be, if you're breastfeeding, your milk supply, your recovery, and your baby's growth. So that should be first and foremost. If you're entering a deficit, make sure that you're assessing your overall maintenance with your breastfeeding calories. If you are breastfeeding, if you're not breastfeeding, I still recommend starting at maintenance to assess. Oftentimes, just being at maintenance in and of itself, you will see weight loss. You will see those additional pounds start to come back off before you even need, and maybe you never even need to enter a calorie deficit, but just getting more consistent with your maintenance calories can be the golden ticket that you're needing, that your body needs. But again, making sure you're prioritizing that rest, you're prioritizing that recovery in that crucial postpartum period, while focusing on getting the nutrients that you need, while focusing on getting the fuel that you need, not only for you, but for baby, before really considering that deficit. Now, I know I threw a lot at you and you're like, okay, but I want what's going to work for me? How much does my body need in terms of caloric intake and macronutrients? And what are these specific micronutrients that are needed? And what are the foods that would that I should incorporate, that would help me to incorporate more of these nutrients that are needed? Which is why I'm so excited to dive into all of these topics in detail more inside Macros for Mama. So Macros for Mama is my self-guided pregnancy and postpartum course. And inside, I dive into each of the trimesters. I dive into a pregnancy overview, a postpartum overview. I have a full recipe and meal guide in there that really breaks down from a macro perspective, easy, simple to follow meal ideas and recipes to help you get in a lot of these crucial micronutrients, as well as prioritizing those macronutrients along with it. So I really dive into, if you're really wanting to get into the specifics of what does my body need, I teach you how to calculate all of that within this course. I teach you how to increase your caloric needs and when to increase your caloric needs, and if you should even be increasing your caloric needs based off the trimester, based off your biofeedback and how your body's responding. I also break down exactly how to calculate, when you're ready, when the time is there postpartum, how to calculate the caloric needs needed to see fat loss while still breastfeeding, which is the biggest question I get asked. So if you are looking for something that is going to teach you exactly how you can experience all of these in an appropriate way, then definitely check out Macros for Mama. I am so excited about this course because, as you know, I'm going through this myself. And this is the exact framework that I'm using, that I would use with my clients based off where they're at in their journey. And this is really the information that can create a really enjoyable and healing journey postpartum. So making sure that we are prioritizing that nutrition. Again, it's all within balance. So don't beat yourself up if you go get a Krispy Kreme like me, okay? I'm doing it. But I know how to balance it. And I know how to use those macronutrient needs, those caloric needs based off those trimesters to really make sure that I am prioritizing not only me, but baby's development, both throughout pregnancy and that postpartum period. I'll link down in the show notes down below, Macros for Mama, if you want to check it out, and also find it at my website at mindandmymacros.com. But I would love, love, love to hear where you're at. If you're listening, I'm guessing you're probably on your pregnancy journey or you're in your postpartum journey. I would love to know where you're at. And whether you are, 6 weeks pregnant, whether you're in your second trimester, whether you just had a baby, I love so much connecting with other moms and moms to be. This has been such an amazing, like I said at the beginning, journey in my life that I just cannot wait to share this information and knowledge with more of you. And it's something that I'm just so thankful that I've kind of had this framework throughout my pregnancy. Again, it's just helped so much. So send me a message on Instagram over at Mind in My Macros. I would love to connect and just share our experiences throughout this chapter of life. But if you know somebody who's also going through pregnancy or postpartum, send this episode to them, share it with them. I hope that it's really helpful, and I hope it can help you kind of understand some of these bigger themes and understand that, yes, there are specific macros and micronutrients and just nutrients in general that are important during these critical phases of life, but you don't need to necessarily track your macros to incorporate those. And again, that's what I teach this foundation inside Macros for Mama. But anyway, I would love to hear from you. As always, it means the world if you want to leave a rating and review on this podcast. I read every single one of them, and I look forward to catching you in next week's episode. Until then, keep minding your wellness. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along and catch all future episodes to help you look and feel like the best version of you. I'll see you in the next episode.